hi to everyone. It's great to be here. And we're going to have a conversation, I suppose, today. So we'll talk about disinformation, online communications, and what's happening in the world around us. But then let's make it conversational and interactive. I can share a bit of a presentation to tell you what I'm talking about. But then after a few minutes, maybe we can really make it a dialogue or a multi-directional conversation. And maybe just to tell you a little bit about myself, I'm based in Brussels, have been, locked down like everyone else, hence the lockdown haircut. Looking forward to things gradually opening up. I've been in Brussels for some years working in EU affairs. So I was working for the European Parliament for some time as a policy advisor, then was doing human rights advocacy, and then got involved with setting up Alliance for Europe, which I'll tell you a little bit more about. And the idea, what was really important to me was making sure that we have a democratic and sustainable Europe that actually functions, that gives people a high quality of life, that maintains this economic prosperity that we have. And this is something that has really been under threat in recent years through the rise of authoritarianism, populism, all of these authoritarian governments or actors in the space that really have an aim of destabilizing and dismantling the European Union. And of course, we want to have a Europe that functions better. And that means bringing people together to create the capacity to do that. And so I was born in Israel, as maybe you can tell from my name, and then moved around Europe. And this kind of opened my eyes up to the fact that this is really important. And then following Brexit and Trump getting elected and this sort of wave after wave of populism and crisis that we've seen, Alliance for Europe got together with a lot of different organizations, civil society movements, concerned citizens, people with a business background, foundations, and so on, got together and said, how can we create a larger societal force to deal with these issues? And how can we really have an impact? And this is how Alliance for Europe was created. And since then, we've also been dealing with this issue of disinformation online, of hate speech online, of strategic communications, and how our message can get out there as people who like democracy and the functioning European environment to live in. So what we've been doing is working with intelligence experts, people who have worked in the intelligence community and then have seen, well, maybe I can apply these skills and experiences in an ethical way to enable better and more effective strategic communications instead of the kind of Cambridge Analytica hacking people and stealing their data sort of thing that we've seen over the years. What I'll do now is tell you a little bit more about the Social Media Intelligence Unit and just some of the thinking that goes into the disinformation space that we see developing online. That's kind of what we're going to do in a couple of minutes. Is there anything from your side, Diria, or does anyone have any questions? Does anyone want to jump in already? Just bouncing it back to you before I launch into another kind of point.
Yeah, I also want to encourage everyone, I mean, to leave your cameras on. This is a very casual exchange, so please feel free to address Omri for any questions or for any input you have.
Great. Okay, so what I'll do now is I'll share my screen with you. 1 second, let me just do this on, if it's possible, using my laptop, it would be easier. Diria, would you be able to enable me to, I think you would need to make me host so that I can share my my screen. Just adjusting the the camera here and so on. Yes. Oh, not yet. Yeah. So once you've made me host, I'll be able to share some slides, essentially.
Daria, you're muted.
I gave the other, you're logged in twice. So unfortunately I made.
Ah, right. Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah.
And I have to reclaim the rights in order to.
No, no, it's fine. It's fine. I'm doing it.
Okay.
It's okay.
Okay.
It's all good. These are the Zoom logistics of 2020. So,
Exactly.
yeah. 1 second. There we go. Here you go. Just let me know if everyone can see this. So, just so that we can give you a bit of a taster on the story and what it all looks like. So I'm going to take you through an understanding of how disinformation works in the space, which also informs the kind of responses that we want to give to disinformation and how we set out our strategic communications. And that can be as companies, as civil society actors, as individual social media users. This is just important to understand. So emotioneering, propaganda, disinformation, a lot of this terminology actually comes from the Cold War. Disinformation is actually a term that was invented by Stalin to identify, strategically determined false information that's intended to confuse your opponents. So the reason that we talk about disinformation rather than, let's say, misinformation is that misinformation can be just any wrong information floating in the space, and that could be an accident. Or we can have disinformation that is directly intended to cause you deception or confusion or anything like that. And what we need to understand about ourselves is that we are not really entirely rational beings. We make a lot of decisions based on our lizard brain. This has been very widely established by psychologists. And if you've read the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, he describes this very well in terms of what decisions do we make rationally and what decisions do we make instinctively. Now, when it comes to things being threatening, we have the fight, flight, or freeze mode, which many of you will have heard of. And this is something that happens to all of us. So basically, the rush of emotions and the signal from our, lizard brain at the basis of our brain here basically tells us, that something dangerous is happening, and therefore we narrow our view. And we make decisions in an uninformed way. Now, disinformation actors, which create a sense of crisis, or engage us in anger, in fear, in frustration, they trigger these sorts of emotional mechanisms in us, which then essentially drive this dynamic. So I'm not going to go through all of the details of all of the slides, but I'm just giving you a taster here, essentially. Essentially, what happens is that disinformation actors throw in these elements of narrative into the space, and then they get those narratives of disinformation to circulate around in the media. So, for example, when you fact check, what happens is you identify disinformation, you publicize the disinformation. Um, as media companies, the news cycle continues, everyone makes money off of it, and then essentially the disinformation picks up more speed. So, for example, um, it, are masks harmful for your immune system? Is Bill Gates injecting everyone with microchips? Is Bill Gates secretly a lizard person? All of these things, when we drive the debate in that direction, um, if you see here, essentially, disinformation actors are actively using this to put out more and more of these controversial, explosive elements into the debate that then get picked up by the large media outlets and into the public conversation, so that they get more and more coverage. So, what we learn from this is that simply pointing at something and saying this is not true is kind of like saying don't think of an elephant. If you've heard about of that term, when I tell you don't think of an elephant, what do? The first thing you do is think of an elephant, and then you go, oh fuck, I shouldn't have thought about that. But you already did. It's too late. So it's the same with disinformation. When you say this isn't true, you're already pointing at the thing and you're driving the debate in the direction of that thing. And then, the QAnon is a case in point in this, where you have essentially large amounts of stuff around QAnon and conspiracy theories happening in the dark corners of the internet, whether it's on Gab or Parler or 8chan or, dark corners of Twitter. But then once the mainstream media picks it up, boom, it really comes into the mainstream, to the point that, now we all know what QAnon is in a way that 6 months ago we didn't. So this is something to really consider. I'm not going to take you through all of the stats and the analysis that are involved here, because I think we actually want to have a conversation. But the thing to really keep in mind is that this kind of stuff can be strategically deployed as part of a military strategy by disinformation actors, like, for example, the Russian government or others, in a way to basically divert resources away from things that they want us to avoid doing as the European Union or as the United States. So I'm not saying that there is some kind of conspiracy at play here, like, one person is pulling all the strings. The environment is very complex. There are a lot of European far-right actors or, extremist actors from different directions that are driving this, but there is also a conscious effort to destabilize and fragment our conversation. So then the question is, what do we do? And the important thing is to establish a sense of collective common sense, to be able to set a narrative of our own, to be able to say, this is the information that we agree on. This is what we know. This is what we value together as a community. And then this is the narrative that we are going to pursue. So rather than chasing after the disinformation, we actually build up our own narrative and a community and drive the conversation based on our own territory. So rather than reacting, what's important is to drive our own campaigning and drive our own narrative in a way that preempts the disinformation circulating. And so I'll close here. I mean, Steve Bannon had this famous quote, what you will see here, flood the zone with shit. The vulgarity is built in. So essentially, what he's talking about is, if you just lie to people all the time, enough times, they'll just not know what's happening anymore, and they'll just have to keep on dealing with the latest tweet, keep on dealing with the latest scandal, keep on dealing with whatever just happened. But what we need to do is step away from that and define a clear own narrative that can then be used to kind of expand the digital territory of actors engaging with an evidence-based narrative as opposed to being driven by the lies. So this is just a bit of a teaser, and maybe I'll stop here and we can have a discussion, and then we can talk a little bit further about what Alliance for Europe is actually doing here with this. So shall we do that? Shall we start the conversation here, Diria?
Yes, so I would ask you all to unmute yourself and yeah, just let us know what you think, and let's keep the conversation going. I'm really interested because also you all come from different corners of Europe. Maybe you could share some of your experience or some of your thoughts. Do you want to stop the presentation so we can see each other better? Who wants to start?
Yes, I was just about to say that.
Hi everyone. Can I chip in?
Please, Justina, say.
Sorry, I'm waiting for my work call, so I may be dragged soon. But thank you for the presentation. It's very interesting. And I'm from Lithuania, and this morning we had the presentation by our security department on the threats around us, within the country, and of course around us. And one of the big parts of that briefing was, of course, disinformation. And they say that especially during the pandemic, a lot of fake news have started being around, and especially with the now, of course, we have this big movement of how they are called anti-vaxxers, who use different false narratives on vaccination process, on vaccines. Very interesting part was also about China, because it says that when, for example, Europe has a big lack of different PPEs, and when China helped and exported to Europe, and then they tried to use a big communication campaign showing China as a savior of Europe by providing those measures. So I don't know, I'm just reflecting loudly that it's very interesting, and I think that the pandemic and all the different aspects that we are seeing about the lockdowns, about the vaccination, about the strategies from different countries, I think they will intensify disinformation campaigns, and it is a big problem. And I think we also see what's happening now with Russian Sputnik vaccine, and how I think Europeans are not yet decided how to work on it. So I think, yeah, it's very interesting, but at the same time a bit scary how this will affect our societies, and will we remain resilient against that? Thanks.
Yeah, I think what you said there is yeah, encapsulated.
Omri, we can't hear you.
That they want to defend their sort of narrative version of COVID, basically. It wasn't our fault, so to speak. They're eager to get across, and they have been very strategic driving the PR report sending. Especially earlier in the crisis, probably remember that. Now the question is, what is the response of the European Union? And we've seen that with the vaccine rollout and etc., the European Union's response has not been ideal in terms of setting the narrative. So even though getting hold of the vaccine has its own complexities, the narrative that emerges is very important, you know, and if there is this sort of drive to divert our attention, and at the same time, you know, support the Hungarian government in getting in Russian government vaccines, and there is, you know, all of these pressures that the European Union isn't able to respond to. It's ever more urgent, I think, for civil society actors, for businesses, for active citizens to really be able to get out there and set a narrative, drive a narrative on social media, in mainstream media, and so on, which makes this work, I think, even more important, you know, because it's not like we want to make the European Union look better. The European Commission has a budget for that, but what we do want is to create a powerful narrative for democracy and for our public health at the end of the day. Like, if people don't believe that wearing a mask will help, or if they don't believe that getting a vaccine is a good thing, that this puts our health, my personal health, your personal health, at risk. And there are those that would prefer us to spend our time arguing about these things and dealing with a COVID crisis rather than giving sanctions on their human rights abuses or whatever else, you know. So there is a logic to this.
Right. I think this distraction, what you just mentioned, is a very, very valid point, that those narratives kind of distract from very important points we should actually be focusing on. But maybe Mihai or Karina, do you want to say something? Please go ahead.
Yeah. So I think the problem is that even before the pandemic, already the traditional media was pretty distorted as well. So there were a lot of research, especially at the time of the election of Trump, that how the media is focusing to the extremities. So what you can see in the news, in the traditional media, is a lot of time is very exaggerated. And it was very interesting that, for example, a lot of people talked about many cities that they are much more dangerous than they are actually, because if you read every week about a homicide or about some murder, then you start to think that if you just go out to the street, then it's very dangerous in a given city, and you could be killed and whatever. Even though if the number of the homicides in the city actually decreased a lot through the years. So, and I think with this pandemic, everything just became much worse, because simply we don't know enough about the virus, and even highly qualified experts and doctors are changing their opinions week after week, a lot of times. For example, here I'm from Hungary, and yeah, we have the Chinese vaccine and Russian vaccine and everything. But actually, it was a purely political decision by the Fidesz, by the government. They bring these vaccines into Hungary. And there are a lot of debates around this, that it was a good decision or a bad decision, because simply the Hungarian government just skipped the European Union and the European authorization process. And basically they created a fast track for especially for the Chinese vaccine. And they decided within a day, basically, that the Chinese vaccine is safe and everybody can use it and whatever, so we will take it. And even though even in China, there were no tests with the population above 60 years old, and the government started to promote and started to provide the Chinese vaccine for the elderly people. So they started the vaccination process with the people above 60 years old, when there were not any country ever till now where they used this specific Chinese vaccines in this age cohort. So, yeah, you can imagine that it's not something very popular. So what I read, that every second people, so half of the people basically refuse the Chinese vaccine. And there are some issues with the Russian vaccine as well, but actually we don't have that much from the Russian, from the Sputnik 5, so it's not as much discussed topic as the Chinese vaccine. But even in the case of the Sputnik and the Chinese vaccine, you can see every week that some medical expert is talking, and they suggest or refuse the given vaccine. So there are very mixed opinions about this topic, and it's no wonder that the people don't really know what to think about this. That is it really safe or not safe, or or what's going on. So, and it's not just in Hungary; it's in many other countries now. In Slovakia, also both from the Sputnik 5, they decided 2 or 3 days ago, and started the same process. So the government pushed the vaccine, and for example, the head of the state, the president, told that it was a very bad idea, and basically they give up the safety and the European process of the vaccine authorization by this. So yeah, I think it's very, very, very difficult in this way. And no wonder that the media can't really handle the situation either.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Diria. Sorry.
No, Omri, please respond to that.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say I found that really interesting in terms of the in terms of your perspective on it, and I think that the Hungarian public debate is really crucial in this, because at the end of the day, Hungary has gone a long way down the road towards a disintegrating democracy and authoritarianism over the years, and especially in the context of this crisis. And it's really, at the end of the day, Hungarians, as a society, that will be able to say, no, we want to do things differently. We want to go back to having stronger democratic institutions and accountable government. But, this is why it's so important to drive this debate also in Hungary, with you being there and being an active participant. So this is exactly the kind of thing that we would like to participate in, to facilitate.
Karina, you are raising your hand here.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Karina Matvienko, and I'm a master's student in Eastern European Studies. Thank you for your very interesting input. I wanted to ask, I don't think I've quite gotten your approach. And I wanted to ask you to elaborate on it a bit further. Is your approach more systemic, or is it more targeted? I mean, do you deal with some kind of media outlets which produce fake news, or do you see the fake news and then you start to deal with it straight away? Could you please elaborate on that a bit further, and just tell us about your procedure, what you do if you see a media outlet or a fake news, and what your further steps would be?
That's a really, really good question. I'm very glad it's a great follow-up to the presentation. So what we would like to do is and what we do in our approach is to be able to map out the ecosystem. So what we did is we developed a platform that essentially monitors the social media space based on intelligence gathering models that are used in the intelligence community. And what this does is it looks at public information. And this way, we can see what narratives are developing. So let's say in the COVID conversation, we can see, okay, masks are an issue in the narrative. People are talking about, is a mask safe or not? People are talking about, the risks of this genetic material in the vaccine, or whatever it is. You can see the narratives develop, and you can see them maybe start off somewhere in a Russian state media, or perhaps somewhere on 8chan, which is a far-right social media space. And then, it gets onto Twitter, and then it gets onto Facebook, and then it gets onto mainstream media. And what we want to do is to be able to identify this gradual spread. And we want to be able to tackle it before it picks up steam. So when we talk about setting a narrative, we mean essentially getting out there, rather than saying, oh no, this about the vaccine is wrong. you know, and the vaccine is not dangerous because X, Y, Z. What we want to get out there to begin with is the vaccine is safe, and this is how great it has been to develop it so quickly. These are all the testing and procedures that were done. This is all the science behind it. Identify in advance what the evidence-based information is and build up a storyline and a community of people sharing that narrative and sharing that story, which is how you then dominate the media space with evidence-based information rather than with disinformation that is there. So just to make it very concrete, the action can begin at the individual level and it can be very targeted, right? So you can identify something coming through, you can see it, and you can respond effectively as an individual, as an organization. What we want to do is to be able to build a large-scale community and a Europe-wide system for doing this with as many actors as possible so that we can set these positive narratives in a way that then acquires scale and then has a systemic impact. We want to be able to drive a narrative towards a safer, better internet space, online space, and a higher level of digital citizenship, especially in Europe. You know, having sort of an ethical European digital space would be really, really important. Right now, we're really dependent on what, you know, American tech companies are doing, or you know, whatever comes our way. It's really, really important for the European Union to set an agenda of what we want the internet to look like. And by getting a lot of people into this conversation and getting a large awareness, a higher awareness of what is at play here, what is happening, then we can actually then go to decision makers and say, this is the change that we require. So it's a step-by-step approach that starts off from the individual person through organizations, through coalitions, and then getting to system change. I hope that this answered it. And maybe just to connect it to the point that was made earlier about Hungary, and you mentioned, you know, how complicated this discussion is with, you know, we don't know enough about the virus and so on. This is why you need a really high level of civic education among people so we can really handle a complicated discussion, you know, because otherwise, if people are not aware of, you know, how to have a democratic debate, then you can just go, well, look over there, the migrants did it. It was them, you know, and then everyone goes, oh, okay, it was the migrants, boom, you know. But then, you know, this is why we need to really understand how to have a democratic debate online. So yeah, I guess I hope that this answered some of the questions.
Thank you very much.
So Omri, you see it like the remedy as in civic education? Just could you just again summary like the remedy against those challenges, what you see there?
I think in the long run, you know, civic education is critical because we all need to kind of have this foundation as part of the way that our society works, right? We need to understand, you know, when people invented cars, then they started giving driving licenses, you know. Right now we have social media and the internet, but we haven't really trained people how to use it, you know, and so I think this is an important factor. However, in the immediate term, what we need right now is we need a lot of different stakeholders to get involved and sort of take their responsibility towards taking action. So what can businesses do to communicate more responsibly about these issues? What can each of us do in terms of a social media user to be out there putting out a higher quality message? What can we do as a coalition of partners or as media outlets, you know? And I think if each one of us moves the needle a little bit, it's also part of our own education, you know? So we talk a lot about, you know, corporate social responsibility, in the private sector. And what does it really mean? So over the years, the corporate social responsibility has been, okay, we'll build a school here, or we'll, sponsor like a local football team or something, get some something nice done in this or that community. But in this day and age of a digital space and social media, there is also a responsibility towards how companies behave online, the kind of conversation that they drive, and then obviously that applies even more so to the media outlets and the like. So I think there are many different building blocks to a solution that we need to get to.
Thank you. Raphael, did you want to contribute to that?
Yeah, sorry, I was a bit distracted today. I wondered, and it briefly shined through in your presentation, Omri, thank you very much, about the disinformation part. But I also wondered, nowadays in social media, is it maybe not so much about wrong information, but more also about disproportionate information pushed into social media and then bringing a wrong impression to the people. For example, vaccinations seem to be pretty safe, but if you see 10 articles from 10 different places in Europe that about problems or deaths with vaccinations, you suddenly think, oh, maybe it's not so safe anymore. So I wonder if it's only about wrong information, and also maybe the social media prioritizing the wrong elements of correct information.
Yeah, again, this is spot on. That's exactly what's happening, and it's part of the problem. Essentially, the social media business model is to give you more of what you want, what you have. You're seeing something, the algorithm recognizes that you're clicking on it, you're watching it, you're consuming it, you like it, you share it, and it just gives you more of what you just did. So that, if you are watching dog videos, it will just give you more dog videos. If you're watching anti-vax videos about how dangerous vaccines are, it will just give you more of that. So I mean, this is simply an incredible statistic. In the US, you have a situation whereby 70% of a cluster that they found of a study where they looked at people who joined specific extremist groups, in terms of the insurrection and people related to those QAnon groups and so on. And the majority of those people joined those groups because they were recommended by Facebook. Here's the group that you might like. Click, and there you go. Facebook just redirected you to a potential far-right terrorist group, and this is exactly the problem. And so, I mean, if you watch this documentary that came out a few months ago called The Social Dilemma, they do a very good job of really vividly describing this business model. So this also builds into the approach that I was talking about and that we're trying to create, is that by driving more and more of this evidence-based information and responsible information online, we're actually triggering the algorithms to offer people more of that, so it's part of enlarging the digital footprint. But in fact, we need to have a serious conversation about this social media business model and whether a society can really exist with this in this way. I mean, and it's something that happens, in fact, every time that there is a new emerging technology. After a few years, after a few decades, we need to have a conversation about how this technology fits into our society. So, this happened when coal came in, when horses were replaced by cars, where, this happens every time. This is not the first time in modern human history that we need to talk about this. It's just happening faster now. And so we need to catch up with it faster.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Omri. Armando, I see you also here on the call. Would you like to contribute?
Yes, thank you for your presentation. Well, the issue, I mean, probably the main question that I had was covered by Rafael mainly on that was precisely what I was aiming to on how social social media is actually kind of forming our news and how we perceive it, but also probably if you can share some insight of what EU is actually doing in order to combat misinformation in regions close to you. I mean, mainly I come from Albania and I see misinformation as a major issue here, and which many times involve also EU actors. Having worked, I mean, in the past I've worked also as an editor for Exitotal, it is a media in Albania, but an important issue occurred back in 2018 that involved also EU representatives in Albania. When we asked, it was fact-checked that the issue was a fake news, obviously, but when we asked the EU representatives in Albania, they just didn't give a comment at all. How do you see nowadays, I mean, these EU actions in the regions in the Western Balkans or Eastern Europe, including Ukraine, Belarus, and other countries? Are they taking any actions to combat or contribute?
Yeah, this is a big question. So let me try and address the different elements that you talked about there, and I hope I can say enough specifically about the Western Balkans, the Eastern Europe, Ukraine, and so on. But of course, the environment in all of these places is very complex, so I'm not going to pretend like I can just solve all the problems in 2 minutes now. But just to start off, I would say that the initial EU response to disinformation, and this is something that we've been talking to them about since we started 2 years ago and following since then, they fell very hard into the trap of just fact-checking, basically. There have been lies about the European Union for many, many years. You know, it's also why Brexit happened. So, you know, the EU is very used to sort of the traditional media sort of lies. It's all Brussels' fault. And so the EU sort of is thinking about it in terms of the European Commission. That's who I mean when I say EU. The Commission thinks about it as in, you know, this is sort of a checklist of all the lies that have been told about us. And here is, you know, us sort of responding, like stating to the world in a press conference, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. And then we get on with our day, you know, and do our thing as the European Commission. This is kind of like the traditional, maybe, you know, from the 1990s until like the mid 2000s way to approach it. Then when it really picked up steam in 2016, 17, and so on, the European Commission started investing more in fact-checking faster and doing more of it. And so giving, you know, this is a lie, this is the truth, this is a lie, this is the truth. But what happened is they were really driving this don't think of an elephant mentality, you know? They were really talking about, you know, all of these things are not true. And this also happened, you know, very much in the context of Ukraine. A lot of this sort of Trump approach to disinformation was tested out in 2014, 15 in Ukraine and in the context of the war and the engagement there. So what we saw was the European Commission had to sort of reevaluate and see how to handle this. And what they did was to centralize communications in a sort of strategic division that does strategic communication for the entire EU and kind of monitors this. A lot more best practice sharing, a lot more information sharing. These are people that we've been speaking to and kind of engaging with and giving them this input as well. And so gradually we've had a more sort of positive approach of investing in civic education, investing in best practice of communications, outwardly setting out a positive narrative, trying to campaign and get the EU message out there in a positive way. And by positive, I mean not that it's all happy, but by assertively getting the information out there rather than waiting for the disinformation to come. And there has been the EU Stratcom task force, which is part of the External Action Service, and they basically monitor all of the Eastern Europe sort of neighborhood for disinformation that is coming through, and then trying to align a Europe-wide response to it, although it is quite difficult to do, and it's taken them time also to understand how to deal with this. So at the moment, we've seen a variety of EU funds deployed on this issue, on monitoring and observing disinformation. There's the Social Media Observatory, which we're a partner of. It's called SOMA, and it's the EU looking at how disinformation spreads. There's also all kinds of efforts towards teacher training, train the trainers, providing this kind of long-term more approaches. But what I would say is that it's very piecemeal. And it's not enough. It's very slow in the responses, and then it's certain elements here and there, but there isn't one large-scale effective response. And so when it comes to the Western Balkans and Eastern Europe, there might be individual communications campaigns of the EU delegations there, and EU member states might sponsor certain initiatives or a campaign to say this is happening and this is a lie and this is what the EU is doing and so on. But it hasn't been robust enough. There hasn't been enough of a loud voice, and this is where we really want to take a step forward on this. Yeah, so I hope that this addressed a little bit of it. I can't tell you specifically what is happening in Albania, but I can tell you what the working method is, and I can tell you that it's been quite fragmented from what I've seen.
Thank you. Also, as I said, because it was important for us back then when trying to address some issues, is your organization, can you provide help to platforms like ours when we actually spot an issue of fake news that actually involves EU actors, when we can address you? So
yeah, that's a great question. I just typed my email in the chat so that all of you can follow up and get in touch if you want. I hope that's okay, Diria. Or we can decide how to coordinate the communication. But yeah, I mean, this is sort of how the conversation got started with James and United Europe and Diria. Essentially, what we would like to do is to be able to offer the communications platform that we have to different users to be able to act on these things and take action independently. And it's a matter of seeing how to organize that, how to do it. But absolutely, we would love to talk and with your platform in Albania or with others to see what the needs are, what the opportunities are, what we can do together. So this would indeed be a fantastic step forward. And ideally, what we would like to arrive at is a situation where individual people or individual organizations can simply have access to the information and to the training, and to be able to respond effectively, communicate effectively, to deal with these things. That's the idea. So yeah, no, thank you very much. And thank you, Raphael, as well, if you're still here or if you already left.
Thank you, Omri, so much. I just have a small question just to wrap it up and just briefly. Do you think the responsibility to combat fake news and misinformation and those narratives which are dominating our attention, do you think it's really the responsibility of the EU institutions to become more involved and to kind of spend more resources on that, as to speak, launching counter propaganda or counter narrative initiatives, or do you see it really as a civic responsibility, basically all of us acting and getting involved?
I would say it's two sides of the same coin, right? Because the problem is urgent. Because we all want to be vaccinated from COVID. We all want to be able to do something meaningful about climate change. We all want to avoid getting into authoritarian government. We all want the European economy to keep on functioning. So this kind of thing is urgent. And in that situation, I think it is up to each one of us to do something. And in the long run, if we want to have a digitally advanced society, economy plus democracy, which because they are next to each other, we need to have a highly competent audience of people and citizenship that are able to engage in this. This also ties into the future of work discussion and the kind of skills that people need to have so that they're not just immediately replaced by robots. And I think that those two discussions also overlap. So there is a level of individual responsibility, but I can tell you that speaking to people in Brussels and talking to the people at the Commission, they feel personally very nervous about this because it's their work that's being attacked. It's them that are of course it's the EU as an organization, but they feel under pressure also, like as professionals, and they think we have to do something because because what is being attacked is Europe's ability to actually operate effectively, and the institutions have a mandate to defend against this or to communicate their own work. And as European taxpayers, we also pay them to do that, so that they probably should do it well. And then, of course, it's also up to all the member states and national governments to deal with this. So it's a multi-level approach, I would say. Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else wants to chip in? We still have 4 minutes, but
yeah, and I'm happy for anyone to email as a follow-up, and we can see what the next steps can be, however you want to take the conversation forward, essentially.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, then thank you so much, Omri, for your time and for this presentation. It was really highly insightful. And yeah, we're looking forward to kind of some follow-up, some sort of follow-up, and then let's see what we do together.
Yeah. As a next step, I mean, we could also show the platform and give a training around how to use it, what to do with it, and so on, and so you can really see it sort of in real time a little bit more, if you like. So yeah, that could be a next step if there is interest.
Sure. I'll
Great.
see with the other advisors as well. So maybe we can gain some others to kind of join us. But yeah, great.
Yeah, we could definitely open to discuss. So yeah, thank you so much for the invitation, and I think the questions were really fantastic. Everything you said was really great, and I think that this is such an important discussion to be having, and it's great to be having it at such a high level. So